Apache woman knocked on his door wearing only a torn piece of cloth. He let her stay all night. John's small cabin sat on the edge of a quiet, open plain. The land around it was mostly barren, dotted with scattered trees and low bushes, but it was his home, and he liked the peace it offered. He had lived there for many years, far from the noise of towns and cities. His life was simple. He woke with the sun, tended to the small garden behind his cabin, chopped firewood when needed, and spent evenings reading by the fire. Most days passed quietly, almost too quietly, but John didn't mind. He enjoyed the calm, the silence, and the sense of control over his own little world. On this particular evening, the wind blew cold across the plains. Snow had not yet fallen, but the air carried a sharp chill that made John pull his blanket tighter around his shoulders as he sat by the fire. He had spent the day working outside, fixing a broken fence and checking on his small herd of chickens. Now, the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the night offered him a sense of comfort that he didn't often feel. He sipped from a cup of tea, the steam rising in gentle swirls, and watched the flames flicker, dancing shadows across the wooden walls of his cabin. The evening had been peaceful, just as John liked it. He was halfway through reading a worn-out book he had borrowed from the town library months ago, losing himself in the story of adventures long past. Occasionally, the wind outside made the cabin creak, but the familiar sounds of the old wooden structure never bothered him. They were part of the comfort of home. Suddenly, a sound broke the quiet. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper but unmistakable, a knock at the door. John froze for a moment, the book resting on his lap. Visitors were extremely rare in these parts. Sometimes a traveling salesman might pass by, or occasionally a neighbor from miles away would stop for a brief visit, but it had been months since anyone had knocked on his door at this hour. He felt a mix of curiosity and caution. The night was cold, and the wind could easily carry a sound across the plains, so he wondered if someone had simply stumbled by. After a few moments, the knocking came again, a little louder this time. John set his cup down carefully, the warmth of the tea still in his hands, and rose to answer. He approached the door slowly, listening for any other signs. There was nothing. No voices, no other sounds, only the faint rustle of the wind through the dry grass. He opened the door, expecting perhaps a traveler or someone in need of directions, but what he saw was entirely unexpected. A young woman stood there, her clothes torn and tattered, barely enough to cover her. Her skin was pale from the cold and she shivered visibly, hugging herself to stay warm. She was barefoot, and her feet were red from the chill of the earth. Her hair was tangled, and her eyes, wide and wary, seemed to hold a mixture of fear, confusion, and exhaustion. For a moment, John didn't speak. He wasn't sure what to say or how to react. The sight of her was startling, but he could also feel the vulnerability radiating from her. She looked like someone who had been through a great deal, someone who had walked a long, difficult path to reach this point. He noticed that she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she took a small, hesitant step forward, as if asking silently for help. Her eyes, though fearful, seemed to plead for safety. John's mind raced. He had to make a decision quickly. The night was cold and the plains were dangerous for anyone, especially someone dressed as she was. There could be a story behind this, a danger he couldn't yet see. But he also felt a strong pull of empathy. He couldn't just leave her standing outside in the freezing air. His life had always been about fairness, kindness, and looking out for others whenever possible. Despite the unusual situation, he knew what he had to do. "Come inside," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. He stepped aside to allow her to enter. She hesitated for a moment, then moved quickly, almost gratefully, into the warmth of the cabin. John closed the door behind her and immediately felt the contrast between the cold outside and the comforting warmth inside. He gestured toward the fire. "Sit here. You must be freezing," he said. She sank to the floor near the fire, still shivering, but her posture slowly relaxed. John grabbed a thick blanket from the nearby chair and draped it over her shoulders. She looked at him with wide eyes, not speaking, but her lips curved slightly in what could only be described as the faintest hint of a grateful smile. That small gesture made John feel that he had made the right choice. He quickly moved around the cabin, gathering a few essentials. A small kettle of water was already boiling on the stove. He poured it into a mug and added some tea leaves. The aroma filled the small space, mingling with the scent of the burning firewood. He handed the warm cup to her carefully. She took it with both hands, holding it close to her face, letting the heat seep into her chilled body. For a while, they sat in silence. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional clink of the cup against the saucer. John watched her, trying not to make her uncomfortable. She seemed cautious, as if unsure whether she could trust him completely. He understood that. In her position, he might have felt the same way. After a few minutes, she finally spoke, her voice quiet and shaky. She didn't give much away, only saying that she had been traveling and was lost. Her words were few, but John could sense the depth of her experience from the way she spoke. There was fear, yes, but also strength. She had survived something difficult, though he did not yet know the details. John nodded slowly. "You're safe here tonight," he said firmly. "No one will harm you here. You can rest." She looked at him, almost surprised, as if she hadn't expected anyone to offer such kindness. There was a moment where they simply regarded each other, two strangers from completely different worlds, finding a fragile connection in the warmth of a small cabin on a cold night. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the cabin remained a haven. John moved around quietly, making sure that she was comfortable. He didn't ask questions that might scare her. He simply provided warmth, food, and a sense of safety. And slowly, as the hours passed, she began to relax. Her shivering subsided, and she leaned back against the blanket, her eyes closing briefly as she let the fire's warmth seep into her bones. John returned to his chair by the fire, picking up his book again, though he didn't read much. Instead, he kept glancing at her, making sure she was okay. He felt a strange mix of emotions: curiosity, concern, and admiration. Despite the unexpected circumstances, he knew he had made the right choice in letting her in. By the time the night grew deep, and the stars shone brightly above the plains, John realized that this was not just a passing moment of compassion. It was a reminder of the importance of human connection, of reaching out to help another person even when circumstances are unusual. He understood that sometimes life presents opportunities to show kindness in unexpected ways, and he was grateful to be able to do so. The young woman finally closed her eyes, leaning slightly against the fire's warmth. John watched over her for a little while longer, ensuring she was safe, before settling back into his chair. The cabin was quiet again, but now the quiet felt different. It was no longer just solitude, it was shared peace. Two lives, strangers until hours ago, were connected, if only briefly, through trust, empathy, and the simple act of letting someone in. And so the night went on, cold outside but warm within the cabin walls. John knew that this night would remain in his memory, not for the fear or surprise of the knock at the door, but for the fragile humanity and courage that had walked in and accepted his help. The morning light seeped slowly through the small windows of John's cabin, casting a soft, golden glow on the wooden walls. Outside, the wind had calmed, and the plains stretched quietly under the pale sunlight. Inside, the young woman stirred slightly, still wrapped in the blanket John had given her. She opened her eyes and looked around, noticing the warm, cozy space for the first time without fear. Her gaze fell on John, who was quietly preparing a small breakfast near the stove. John had set a simple table with bread, eggs, and a bit of fresh fruit from his small garden. He moved carefully, making sure the woman could see that he meant no harm, that everything here was for her comfort. When she saw the food, a faint smile appeared on her face, though she still seemed unsure. "Please eat something," John said softly. "You must be hungry." She nodded, her hand still shaking slightly as she reached for a piece of bread. She ate slowly, cautiously, as if each bite reminded her of safety. John watched her quietly, giving her space but ready to help if needed. He understood that after a night outside in the cold, after whatever she had been through, it might take time for her to trust someone fully. After she had eaten, John brought her a fresh cup of tea. The warmth of the drink seemed to soothe her, and she sipped it carefully, her eyes scanning the cabin. She noticed the small decorations John had collected over the years, old photographs, simple handmade ornaments, and a few books neatly stacked on a shelf. It was clear that this cabin was not just a shelter, it was a home. The sense of normalcy of human care seemed to surprise her. She had probably spent days surviving, running, or hiding, and now, for the first time in a long while, she felt safe. John sat down across from her, letting the quiet of the morning fill the space between them. He didn't rush to ask questions. He had learned that people reveal their stories only when they are ready. Instead, he allowed her to set the pace, to share what she wanted to share. Slowly she began to speak, softly and cautiously, as if testing whether he would respond with understanding or judgment. I was walking for many days," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know where to go. I had no one to help me." Her words came slowly, broken by pauses as she struggled to express herself. But John listened quietly, nodding occasionally, letting her feel that she was heard. She went on to explain that she had fled from a place far away, a town where danger and fear had become part of daily life. She spoke of threats to her family, of walking long distances with little food or water, and of nights spent hiding wherever she could find shelter. John could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the strain of having endured so much. Yet beneath that fatigue there was a quiet strength, a determination to survive no matter the odds. John offered small reassurances. "You are safe now," he said. "No one will harm you here. You can rest, and when you are ready, you can tell me as much as you want." The woman looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and caution. She seemed surprised that someone could offer such kindness without asking anything in return. Slowly, the tension in her body eased, and she allowed herself to lean back, taking comfort in the simple act of being cared for. Time passed as they sat together. John continued his morning routine, preparing more food and tending to chores, but always keeping a careful eye on her. He noticed how she moved cautiously around the cabin, touching objects with curiosity but also wariness. She had clearly been through difficult experiences, and even small, ordinary things. A cup, a chair, a blanket seemed to need a moment of reassurance before she could fully accept them. As the day grew brighter, John suggested that she might want to wash up. He guided her to the small basin of warm water he had prepared, and she slowly dipped her hands, then her face, into the water. The simple act of washing seemed to bring a sense of relief. She looked more alert now, more aware of her surroundings, and the fear that had gripped her the night before began to fade. Afterward, they returned to the warmth of the fire, and she sat quietly, sipping tea and watching the flames. John could see that she was gathering her strength, preparing to share more of her story. He didn't push her, he waited patiently. Trust, he knew, could not be rushed, and she needed to feel fully safe before revealing the deeper truths of her journey. Gradually, she began to open up more, her voice steadier than before. She spoke of the land she had come from, a place filled with memories of family and friends, and of the hardships that had forced her to leave. John listened carefully, asking gentle questions only when appropriate. Each word she shared painted a picture of resilience and courage, of a young woman who had faced unimaginable challenges yet refused to give in to despair. John admired her quietly. He had always respected strength, and here it was, embodied in someone so young, someone who had survived long journeys on foot, nights without shelter and days without food. The courage she displayed was inspiring, and he felt a growing sense of responsibility to help her, not out of pity, but out of respect for her determination to endure and survive. The morning passed into afternoon. The sun climbed higher in the sky and the warmth of the cabin grew more inviting. John offered her more food, some bread and fruit, and she accepted, eating slowly, savoring each bite. There was a sense of normalcy returning, however fragile, and John felt hopeful. He knew that once someone had experienced such fear and hardship, rebuilding trust and comfort would take time, but today had been a start. They spoke more as the hours went on. The woman asked questions about John's life, about the small cabin, the garden, and the routines he followed. For the first time, she seemed curious rather than cautious. John shared small stories of his own life, not to overwhelm her but to create a sense of connection, to show that life could be simple, kind, and safe. By evening, the two had formed a quiet understanding. They were strangers, yes, but there was a bond growing between them, fragile but real. She had come into his life unexpectedly, seeking shelter, and he had given it willingly. In return, he had gained insight into courage, resilience, and the human spirit's capacity to endure hardship. The encounter had changed both of them, if only slightly, reminding them that even brief moments of compassion could leave a lasting impact. As night fell again, the woman wrapped herself in the blanket John had provided and sat quietly by the fire. She seemed more relaxed now, her shivering gone, replaced by a calm sense of safety. John watched her, feeling a deep respect and admiration. He understood that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was a small victory, a night where trust and kindness had created a temporary sanctuary in a harsh world. The wind outside picked up again, rustling the dry grass across the plains. But inside the cabin there was warmth, there was safety, and there was a fragile peace that had been hard-earned. John and the young woman had shared the morning and afternoon in quiet understanding, neither rushing the other, each learning something about trust, survival, and the unexpected ways human lives could intersect. As she rested, John reflected on the day. He thought about how easily life could change in a single moment, how a knock on a door could bring a story of hardship, courage, and resilience into the life of someone who had lived quietly, predictably, for many years. He realized that this experience, though unexpected, was a gift, a reminder that helping another person was not only an act of kindness, but also an opportunity to witness the strength of the human spirit firsthand. By the time the evening shadows grew long, the woman was calm, resting by the fire, occasionally glancing at John with a look of quiet gratitude. John felt a sense of fulfillment he had not experienced in a long time. The morning and afternoon had been more than just the passage of time. They had been a journey of trust, care, and the small, simple acts that could make someone feel safe after enduring fear and hardship. And as the night approached, he knew that tomorrow would be another day, perhaps with more stories, more revelations, and more chances to continue this fragile bond of trust and understanding. For now, he allowed the moment to settle, appreciating the quiet courage of the young woman and the profound reminder that even the smallest gestures of kindness could have a lasting impact on someone's life. The evening settled over the plains, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple. Inside John's cabin, the warmth from the fire contrasted sharply with the cold wind that whispered outside. The young woman sat near the fire, wrapped tightly in the blanket John had given her, and for the first time that day, she seemed to relax completely. There was still a hint of caution in her movements, but she no longer shivered, and her gaze had softened as she observed the familiar surroundings. John, sensing that the moment was right, settled into a chair across from her. He had spent most of the day offering small comforts, food, tea, warmth, and gentle conversation, but he now felt that she might be ready to share more of her story. The silence in the cabin was not awkward. Rather, it was filled with understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that they were both present, sharing the moment. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice quiet but clear. I came from far away," she said. "A town where life became dangerous. My family, they were in trouble. I had to leave. I didn't know where to go." Her words were halting, interrupted by pauses as she collected her thoughts. Each sentence revealed not just her fear, but the courage it had taken to survive. John nodded slowly, encouraging her without pressing too hard. "You're safe here," he said gently. "You don't have to worry about danger. You can tell me whatever you want." She hesitated, then continued. "There were people, they wanted to hurt my family. I couldn't stay. I had to run for days and nights, through forests, across rivers, sometimes without food. I was always afraid of being caught." Her eyes glistened as she spoke, and John could sense the weight of the journey she had endured. She had survived hardships that would have overwhelmed many, yet here she was, still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. John listened carefully, offering small reassurances. "You've been very brave," he said. "I can't imagine what it must have been like. But now at least you are safe. That's what matters right now." She nodded, letting the words sink in. For a moment she seemed to drift in thought, staring into the fire as if the flames held memories of her long journey. Then slowly she began to reveal more details. "Some nights I slept under trees, sometimes without blankets. Sometimes I found abandoned cabins, but they were empty and I was alone. I had no one to trust. I learned to move quietly, to hide, to survive." John felt a mix of awe and sorrow as he listened. The experiences she described were harrowing, yet she spoke of them with a quiet determination rather than despair. There was a resilience in her voice, a strength forged from necessity, and John realized that this young woman had endured far more than many could imagine. "You are incredibly strong," John said. "Even after everything you faced, you're still here, still standing. That's remarkable." She glanced at him, a faint smile appearing for the first time. I try. I have to try. I cannot give up." Her voice was steady now, carrying a determination that seemed almost unshakable. John admired her deeply, recognizing the courage it took to continue moving forward despite fear and exhaustion. As the night deepened, they spoke more about her journey. She shared stories of walking through forests filled with the sounds of unseen animals, of crossing rivers with currents that threatened to sweep her away, and of nights spent listening to distant noises that made her heart race with fear. Each story revealed not only her vulnerability, but also her ability to survive against the odds. John offered her food and water throughout their conversation, ensuring that she regained some of the energy she had lost during her travels. He noticed the way she paused before taking bites or sips, as if her body was still adjusting to the simple comforts of regular meals and warmth. He understood that after days of hardship, the smallest acts of care could feel extraordinary. Slowly, the young woman began to relax further, her posture becoming more open, her gestures less guarded. The firelight reflected in her eyes, highlighting a spark of hope that had been hidden beneath fear for so long. She began to ask John questions, curious about his life and his home. For the first time, she seemed interested not only in survival but in connection. John answered her questions patiently, sharing stories of his quiet life on the plains, his routines, and the little joys he found in tending his garden and caring for his chickens. He spoke of books he had read, sunsets he had watched, and the peace that came from living close to the land. The woman listened intently, occasionally nodding or smiling, as if the calm and predictability of his life were something she had longed for but rarely experienced. As the hours passed, John and the young woman developed a sense of companionship. Though they had only known each other for a short time, there was an unspoken understanding growing between them. She had come into his life unexpectedly, carrying stories of hardship and courage, and he had welcomed her with warmth and safety. The connection between them was fragile but real, built on trust, empathy, and shared human experience. Eventually, the conversation turned toward the future. John asked gently, "What will you do next? Do you have a place to go?" She shook her head. I don't know. I just wanted to survive tonight. Tomorrow, maybe I will find my family. Maybe I will find a safe place. I don't know yet." Her uncertainty was clear, but there was also a sense of determination in her eyes. She had survived so much already. She was not about to stop now. John considered this carefully. He knew that while tonight she was safe, the world outside the cabin was still full of challenges and dangers. Yet he also knew that he could only help her so much. She would need to find her own path eventually. For now, his role was to offer safety, comfort, and understanding. "You will find your way," he said finally. "You are strong and you have survived so much already. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we will see what can be done." She nodded, a sense of relief evident in her expression. For the first time in days, she seemed to believe that there was hope, that someone cared, and that the world could hold moments of kindness even amidst danger and hardship. As the night deepened, John continued to watch over her, making sure she had everything she needed. He brought her an extra blanket, adjusted the fire, and ensured that the cabin remained a place of warmth and comfort. The young woman, finally feeling safe enough, leaned back and let herself rest fully, her breathing slowing as she drifted toward sleep. In the quiet of the cabin, John reflected on the events of the day. The young woman had shared parts of her journey that were painful, yet she had done so with bravery and honesty. He understood that the experiences she had endured would leave marks on her, memories that might never fade. But he also saw that the human spirit, when met with kindness and understanding, could begin to heal, even in small ways. He realized that their encounter, brief as it might seem, had already changed him. He had offered shelter, but in return, he had witnessed courage, resilience, and hope. He had seen the strength of someone who had endured fear and hardship and continued to move forward. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of compassion, of opening one's door to another human being in need. Outside, the wind continued to blow softly, rustling the grass and carrying the chill of the plains. Inside, however, there was warmth, safety, and a sense of quiet understanding. The night was long, but for the young woman it was a night of trust, recovery, and connection. For John, it was a night of reflection, gratitude, and a deeper understanding of human resilience. The young woman's story had begun to unfold, and though much remained unsaid, there was progress. She was no longer just a frightened stranger at the door. She was a survivor, a person with experiences that demanded respect, and someone who had begun to place her trust in another human being. John watched her for a while, his heart filled with admiration and care. He understood that tomorrow would bring new challenges, decisions, and perhaps even more revelations about her journey. But tonight, they had shared something rare and precious, a moment of understanding and connection that transcended fear and hardship, a small sanctuary in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. And as the fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls, John felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had done more than offer shelter. He had borne witness to courage, and he had provided the first step toward healing. In return, the young woman had reminded him of the strength of the human spirit, the importance of empathy, and the profound impact of opening one's door to another in need. The following morning dawned crisp and clear over the plains, and sunlight filtered gently through the small windows of John's cabin. Inside, the young woman was awake earlier than usual, quietly stirring under the blanket that had provided her warmth and comfort throughout the night. She moved carefully, almost as if testing the stability of her new surroundings. Her eyes, however, held a light that had not been there before, a spark of confidence, hope, and cautious curiosity. John, already up and tending to the small fire, noticed her movement and offered a gentle smile. "Good morning," he said softly. "Did you sleep well?" The woman nodded, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "I feel better today, stronger." John nodded, understanding that she was not only recovering physically but also beginning to regain her sense of trust and emotional stability. The events of the past days had been exhausting for her, and it was remarkable to see how much she had endured. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and hardship, yet she continued to move forward, step by step, guided by determination and resilience. Breakfast was a simple affair. John offered her porridge and some fresh fruit, and she ate slowly, savoring each bite, mindful of how her body responded to food after days of scarcity. As she ate, they spoke quietly, exchanging small details about their lives, their surroundings, and the routines that shaped their days. There was no pressure in the conversation, only a gentle, shared understanding that allowed the young woman to feel safe enough to relax and participate. After breakfast, John suggested that she might like to explore the cabin a little and perhaps help him with small chores. He thought that giving her simple tasks could restore a sense of normalcy and purpose after so many days of fear and flight. The young woman hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready, but eventually she agreed. Together they tidied the cabin, arranged firewood, and carried water from the small barrel outside. During these moments of shared work, an unspoken bond began to form. John noticed that she moved with care and thoughtfulness, approaching each task methodically and showing attention to detail. She was still cautious, still observing him carefully, but she had begun to accept his guidance, and the idea that this small, quiet space could be a place of safety, even if temporarily. As they worked, she began to share more fragments of her past, moments that were difficult to speak aloud, but that she had held tightly inside. She spoke of family members she had been separated from, of places she had once called home, and of people she had known who had been kind to her in fleeting moments. Each story was tinged with both sadness and gratitude, reflecting a life shaped by both challenge and fleeting glimpses of hope. John listened with patience and care. He refrained from pressing for details or asking questions that might cause her discomfort. He knew that trust was delicate, something that had to be earned slowly, especially after someone had endured trauma. By offering consistency, warmth, and a steady presence, he allowed her to share at her own pace. The afternoon brought a moment of quiet reflection. They sat together near the fire, drinking tea, watching the sunlight shift through the windows. The young woman's eyes were thoughtful as she glanced outside at the plains stretching endlessly in every direction. She seemed to be processing her recent journey, thinking about what had happened and considering what might come next. "You've been very brave," John said gently, breaking the silence. "You've survived so much. I can see it in the way you move, the way you speak, the way you hold yourself." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I had no choice," she admitted softly. "I had to keep going. I had to survive. There was no other way." John nodded, understanding completely. Survival often demanded strength that few could comprehend. Yet even as he acknowledged her resilience, he also recognized the importance of allowing her to feel safe, to rest, and to regain trust in others. That trust, fragile as it was beginning to grow. As the day continued, John offered small comforts, a warm bath, freshly laundered clothes, and a nourishing meal. Each act of care was met with quiet gratitude. She had learned to survive with almost nothing, yet she appreciated even the simplest gestures. The warmth of clean clothes, the taste of hot food, the comfort of a secure place to rest. These were luxuries she had not experienced in days, and they made her feel human again, rather than a mere survivor struggling against the world. In the evening, after the chores were done and the meal had been eaten, the young woman moved closer to the fire. She began to ask questions, not just about John's life, but about the world, the land around them, and the small joys of daily living. She wanted to know how he had managed to live alone, how he had built a life that seemed so peaceful despite its simplicity, and what he found meaningful in the quiet rhythms of life on the plains. John answered thoughtfully, sharing stories about sunsets, the changing seasons, the satisfaction of tending a garden, and the peace that came from living close to the land. He told her that life was rarely easy, but even in hardship, there were moments of beauty and serenity worth noticing. The young woman listened intently, absorbing not just his words but the calm, steady energy he brought into the room. As night fell again, the two sat quietly together, the fire crackling gently between them. The young woman had begun to relax fully, no longer simply surviving the moment but beginning to feel comfortable and secure. She leaned back against the blanket, her gaze on the fire, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel a sense of normalcy, a sense of belonging, even if temporary. John observed her carefully. He could see the progress she had made since arriving at the cabin. She had gone from a frightened, exhausted traveler to someone slowly reclaiming a sense of confidence, trust, and hope. He knew that her journey was far from over, but tonight marked a step forward, a night where she could rest, heal, and feel the quiet reassurance that there were still kind people in the world. Throughout the night, John remained attentive without being intrusive. He added more firewood, checked that the cabin remained warm, and ensured that she had everything she needed for a restful sleep. He understood the importance of these small acts. They were more than gestures of kindness. They were symbols of safety, stability, and care. The young woman, now resting comfortably by the fire, occasionally glanced at John with a look of gratitude. She did not speak much, but her eyes conveyed appreciation, trust, and the recognition that someone had opened their door to her without judgment or expectation. For her, this simple act of shelter had become a lifeline, a reminder that human connection could exist even after hardship and fear. John reflected quietly on the day's events. He realized that the experience had been transformative for both of them. While he had provided safety, warmth, and comfort, he had also gained insight into resilience, courage, and the quiet strength that emerges when someone refuses to give up despite overwhelming challenges. Their bond, though new and delicate, had deepened through shared moments of care, conversation, and mutual respect. Outside, the wind continued to stir, rustling the grass and carrying the chill of the plains. Inside, the cabin remained a sanctuary of warmth and trust. The young woman had begun to reclaim a sense of security, and John had reaffirmed the importance of compassion, patience, and understanding. Together, they had created a small, fragile world of calm amidst the harshness of reality, a space where trust could grow and healing could begin. As the night drew on, John watched over her once more, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had witnessed remarkable courage and strength, and he had provided shelter and care when it was needed most. The young woman, in turn, had shown that even in the face of fear and adversity, the human spirit could endure, adapt, and slowly begin to heal when met with kindness. In the stillness of the cabin, with the fire casting warm, flickering shadows across the walls, John felt a profound sense of connection. The events of the day had been more than routine. They had been a testament to the power of empathy, the importance of offering help without expectation, and the lasting impact that simple acts of care could have on someone's life. The young woman, now resting peacefully, symbolized hope, resilience, and the quiet courage that exists in the human spirit. And John, through his unwavering presence and compassion, had become a part of that journey, a witness to her strength, and a reminder that kindness, even in small forms, could create profound change. The morning sun broke over the plains, spilling soft golden light into John's cabin. The warmth of the fire from the night before had faded, replaced by the gentle heat of the sun, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The young woman had been awake for some time, quietly observing the cabin and the surrounding land. Her eyes, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now held a quiet strength, tempered by the trust she had begun to place in John. John noticed her movement and smiled gently. "Good morning," he said. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, a small smile curving her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "I feel stronger today. Thank you." John felt a sense of warmth inside, not just from the sun or the cabin, but from the knowledge that his presence had provided her with safety and comfort. He had watched her transform from a frightened, vulnerable traveler into someone who carried herself with cautious confidence. The journey she had endured was far from over, but she had taken the first steps toward reclaiming her strength. Breakfast was simple yet nourishing. John had prepared eggs, bread, and some fresh fruit. The woman ate slowly, savoring each bite, mindful of the way her body responded to the food after days of scarcity. There was a quiet satisfaction in the act, a sense of normalcy returning after so many days of fear and uncertainty. As they ate, John asked gently, "Have you thought about where you will go next?" The woman paused, considering her answer. I don't know yet," she admitted softly. "I need to find my family, but I am unsure where they are. I need to be careful and I need to be ready." John nodded. "It is wise to be cautious," he said. "But remember, you are strong. You've survived so much already. That strength will guide you." After breakfast, they spent the morning preparing for her journey. John helped her gather supplies, a small bundle of clothing, some food for the road, and a water flask. Each item was carefully packed, not too heavy, yet enough to sustain her for the first leg of her journey. The young woman moved deliberately, showing the care and thoughtfulness that had always been part of her character. As they worked, they spoke quietly, reflecting on the time they had spent together. She shared how much it meant to her to have a safe place, a warm meal, and someone who did not judge or question her. John, in turn, spoke of the lessons he had learned from her courage, resilience, and determination. It was a conversation not just of words, but of shared understanding, mutual respect, and recognition of the strength found in both of them. The cabin, once a place of solitude for John, had become a sanctuary for two people who had each endured different kinds of hardship. The walls, the fire, and the small comforts of home had provided a safe space for recovery, reflection, and the growth of trust. And now, as the time approached for her to continue her journey, there was a quiet sadness mixed with hope. When everything was ready, the young woman stood near the door, her small bundle in hand. She looked at John, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and a trace of sorrow. I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You gave me safety. You gave me hope." John smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "No thanks are needed," he replied. "You survived, and that is what matters most. Remember your strength, trust yourself, and keep moving forward. You will find your family and you will find safety. I believe in you." She nodded, taking a deep breath. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was filled with the weight of shared experience, the quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them together, and the understanding that life, though unpredictable, could offer moments of kindness, connection, and hope. Finally, she stepped outside, feeling the cool morning air on her skin. The plain stretched endlessly before her, vast and open, yet no longer frightening. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty before, but now she carried something more. The knowledge that someone had believed in her, that she could trust, that human kindness existed even in the harshest of places. John watched her carefully as she adjusted her small bundle and prepared to begin her journey. "Take care," he said gently. "Be safe and remember, you are strong enough to face what comes." She paused for a moment, turning back to look at him. Her eyes shone with quiet determination. "I will," she said softly, "and thank you, I will never forget this." With that, she began to walk across the plains, her steps deliberate but steady. John followed her gaze until she disappeared into the distance. a figure of resilience moving toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The wind carried faint echoes of her presence, and for John, the sight was both a reminder of the fragility of life and the extraordinary strength that lay within the human spirit. After she had gone, John returned to the cabin, sitting quietly by the fire. The space felt empty without her, yet there was a sense of fulfillment that replaced the solitude he had once known. He reflected on the events of the past days, the sudden knock at the door, the fear and vulnerability he had witnessed, and the courage and resilience he had been privileged to see. Each moment had been a lesson in empathy, compassion, and the quiet power of human connection. He thought about the young woman's journey ahead. She would face challenges, no doubt, but he knew that she had gained more than physical strength during her time at the cabin. She had also reclaimed a sense of trust, hope, and the understanding that even in the darkest times, kindness existed. That knowledge would guide her, giving her the confidence to continue forward to seek safety and to reunite with her family. John's thoughts turned inward as well. He realized that his life, once defined by solitude and routine, had been transformed by this brief encounter. He had offered help, yes, but he had also gained insight into courage, resilience, and the profound impact of simple, compassionate acts. The experience had reminded him that life was unpredictable, but that small gestures of kindness could create ripples that changed the course of someone's journey forever. The day passed slowly. John tended to his chores with a quiet mindfulness, aware of the absence of the young woman, yet feeling the lasting impression she had left behind. He carried the memory of her resilience, her courage, and the trust she had placed in him, as a reminder of what it meant to truly connect with another human being. By evening, he sat once more by the fire, reflecting on the extraordinary sequence of events that had begun with a single knock at the door. The wind outside rustled the grass across the plains, but inside the cabin there was warmth, stillness, and a sense of peace. Though the young woman had departed, the lessons, experiences, and quiet joys of their time together remained, embedded in the memory of both. John understood that life would continue, as it always did. The plains would remain vast and quiet, the cabin would stand as it always had, and his routines would return. But he also knew that the brief encounter had left a mark, a reminder of the power of empathy, the courage of those who endure hardship, and the quiet ways in which trust, hope, and human connection could transform lives. And as night fell over the plains, with stars beginning to shimmer in the clear sky, John felt a sense of closure and fulfillment. The young woman's journey would continue, shaped by the courage she had shown and the trust she had been given. And he, too, would carry forward the lessons of compassion, patience, and the quiet strength that arises when one opens a door to another in need. The cabin, once again quiet, held the warmth of their shared moments. Though she was gone, the memory of her courage and resilience lingered in every corner. The warmth of the fire, the neatness of the room, and the faint imprint of trust that had been built in a few short days. John knew that life would bring more challenges, more surprises, but he also knew that he had witnessed something remarkable: the human spirit's capacity to survive, trust, and grow stronger even after enduring great hardship. In the stillness of the night, he closed his eyes for a moment, reflecting on the profound simplicity of the experience. A single act of kindness, a warm place to rest, and the patient presence of another human being had created a moment that would endure far longer than the brief days they had spent together. The young woman had left with hope, and John had been reminded that even the smallest gestures could have the greatest impact. And so, as the fire dwindled to glowing embers and the stars shone brightly over the plains, John sat quietly, carrying the memory of the night the young woman knocked on his door. A memory that reminded him, and anyone who heard the story, that courage, resilience, trust, and kindness were the threads that wove human lives together, even in the harshest of circumstances.